A filter is approaching the Earth. The criterion it carries has nothing to do with what civilizations have been trained to value. Not religion, not credentials, not wealth, not the visible accumulations that a person can list when asked who they are. The filter does not read those records. It reads something else, something most people have never been asked to look at directly, and have rarely been able to name when they did. What it reads is the vibration each person has accumulated through everything practiced repeatedly when no one else was watching. The thoughts that became automatic, the intentions that governed daily choices over years and decades, the grudges sustained as a permanent stance, the kindness performed without expectation of return or never performed at all, the discrepancy between what was said in public and what was sustained in private. None of this is registered in any document. None of this can be appealed. None of it can be fabricated in the moment of evaluation, because there is no moment of evaluation. The reading is continuous. It has been continuous for as long as the person has been alive. This filter is the operative principle that several distinct traditions and several distinct disciplines have been describing, separately and without coordination, for over a century. And that becomes coherent only when the descriptions are placed beside one another. Allan Kardec, codifying the Spiritist doctrine in 19th century France, called it the vibrational law that governs the passage of inhabited worlds from one evolutionary category to the next. Winfried Otto Schumann, calculating the resonant cavity between the planet's surface and the ionosphere in 1952, measured its frequency. Jagadish Chandra Bose, at the start of the 20th century, demonstrated that this frequency is not abstract. It is responded to by every living organism, including the ones the human mind had assumed were inert. Stefano Mancuso, a century later, has documented how that response operates with a sophistication that requires entire categories of thought to be revised. The work of Royal Rife in the 1930s established that frequency does not merely correlate with matter, it interacts with it directly, measurably, and consequentially. The picture these accounts form, when placed in sequence, is the picture of a planet moving into a new operational range, and of a human organism that was tuned to the previous one and has been progressively losing the capacity to register the change. To understand what is being lost, the first word that has to be returned to its original meaning is apocalypse. The word has undergone one of the greatest semantic distortions in the history of language. In contemporary usage, it designates external catastrophe, fires, floods, the collapse of civilization, the end of all things visible. The original Greek says nothing of this. Apocalypsis designates the act of lifting the veil, of uncovering what was hidden. The difference between these two definitions is not academic. It is the difference between expecting a disaster from outside and understanding that the real process is internal, deep truths surfacing, and everything that depended on their concealment to function ceasing to hold. The filter approaching the Earth is precisely this. Not a wall, not a wave, not a punishment, but the lifting of a veil that has allowed several incompatible vibrational ranges to coexist on a single planet for several thousand years, and the subsequent narrowing of that planet's operational range to a single one. The mechanism is not moral. No one is being judged. No one is being weighed by a court of merit. The principle operating here is the same one that governs any frequency-based system. A receiver tuned to a specific range picks up only what vibrates within that range. When the range shifts, what previously fell inside it ceases to be received, not because it was excluded, but because the technical compatibility between its frequency and the frequency of the system it exists in has ceased to exist. Applied to the human being, this means that the vibrational pattern each person sustains internally becomes the sole criterion of compatibility with the planet that hosts them. And this pattern is formed not by declaration, but by the real accumulation of everything the person has practiced. This needs to be stated plainly. Intellectual agreement does not move vibration. A person can read about the principle, agree with every proposition contained in this account, take notes, repeat the words to others, and continue to vibrate at exactly the same frequency they vibrated at before encountering it. Vibration does not register what was understood. It registers what was practiced when no one was watching. It registers what was repeated until it became automatic. The loops of thought sustained over decades, the emotional responses that became default, the small choices made when the only witness was the person themselves. The distance between recognizing this intellectually and applying it in daily life is precisely the distance the new cycle of the earth will render unsustainable. The phrase "from dust you came, and to dust you shall return" is typically treated as symbolic language. Within the Spiritist framework, it is a literal description, and once the literal reading is restored, its consequences are difficult to contain. All the matter that composes the human body belongs to the earth. At the moment of conception, the cells assembled to form the embryo are atoms drawn from the soil, the atmosphere, the water, the food consumed by the mother, every gram of which originated in the planet. From that instant onward, no component of the human body escapes this chain. The water that hydrates tissues was extracted from the planet. The food that builds muscle and bone grew from the soil. Anyone who consumes meat consumes an organism that itself fed on plants, which themselves drew minerals from the same source. Every atom that forms the human structure is borrowed matter, and the loan is held by a single creditor. This observation, when taken to its logical consequences, alters the relationship between humanity and Earth fundamentally. The Earth ceases to be a resource available for use and becomes the organism that sustains the inhabitant. The relationship operates in the same terms as the relationship between bacteria and the body that hosts them. They depend on it absolutely to exist. If the host organism becomes ill or dies, the bacteria that depended on it lose the conditions that made their existence possible. Humanity occupies exactly this position in relation to the Earth. Mistreating the organism that makes physical existence possible is not merely an ecological issue, it is an ontological one. And the intelligence of this host organism is a category that has been systematically underestimated by every framework that treats the Earth as inert. In the early 20th century, the Indian physicist Jagadish Chandra Bose conducted a series of experiments that demonstrated something the scientific consensus of his time was unprepared to receive. Using precision instruments he built himself, he recorded electrical potentials in plants. He demonstrated that Mimosa pudica responds to electrical stimuli with coordinated contractions, that plants register injury in measurable electrical signals, and that what had been described as mere reflex was, in his data, a coordinated response of the organism to its environment. A century later, the plant neurobiologist Stefano Mancuso has taken this investigation to a level that requires entire categories of cognitive science to be reopened. In The Revolutionary Genius of Plants, Mancuso documents behaviors that require information processing of a kind that cannot be accounted for by mechanism alone. A climbing vine grows in the exact direction of a support before touching it, without possessing eyes, brain, or nervous system in any sense the term has been used. Something coordinates this movement. Something processes the spatial information involved in it. Mancuso has demonstrated that every plant cell processes information and communicates with other cells, that plants solve complex problems of resource allocation, that they recognize threats and modify their development in response. If individual plant organisms operate with this degree of sophistication, the scale of intelligence at the level of a planet, composed of trillions of such organisms, integrated through systems that predate human civilization by orders of magnitude, is not a matter of speculation, but of inference. The Earth is a living system, not the inert object that has been assumed for so long, operating with an intelligence that predates human existence, and within which human existence is one expression among many. If the Earth is a living organism in the process of vibrational elevation, and if every cell of the human body is matter borrowed from this being, then the relationship between the inhabitant and the planet is no longer metaphorical. It is a concrete chemical and electromagnetic continuity. The vibration of the physical body and the vibration of the planet that constitutes it are, in the most literal sense, coupled. Those who treat the planet as a disposable object, without recognizing that every cell of their own body is matter borrowed from this being, are not committing an environmental error. They are sustaining an internal vibrational pattern that is incompatible with the organism whose substance they are made of. The Earth possesses a measurable electromagnetic frequency. In 1952, the German physicist Winfried Otto Schumann calculated that the cavity formed between the planet's surface and the ionosphere generates a resonance at approximately 7.83 Hz. The frequency is not theoretical. Monitoring stations around the world detect it continuously. The Earth pulses, and the pulse is constant. The data point that connects this to the subject of vibrational compatibility was documented by researchers at Laurentian University in Canada, who established over 3.5 years of measurements that the dominant frequency of the human brain in its resting state corresponds precisely to the resonant range of the Earth ionosphere cavity. The brain and the planet operate on the same frequency. Within any framework that takes vibrational compatibility seriously, this is the natural condition, not coincidence. The human nervous system was tuned to the planet that produced it. If this synchrony is the natural condition, the question that imposes itself is what has happened to it. The rupture began before the smartphone. It began with electricity. From the moment artificial light extended the active hours of human beings beyond the natural cycle of sunrise and sunset, the circadian clock that had been calibrated by exposure to natural light throughout the entire evolutionary history of the species began receiving contradictory signals. The body had no precedent for it. Each technological layer that accumulated afterward amplified the interference. Radio, television, cellular networks, Wi-Fi. Each system generates artificial electromagnetic fields that overlap the field produced by the Earth itself, and the human organism, situated within these overlapping fields, is required to operate inside a signal environment for which it was never tuned. The frequency of 7.83 Hz continues pulsing, but the human organism that should be receiving it as its dominant signal is now receiving it as one signal among many, often as the weakest among many, and the synchrony that was the natural condition has become the exception. 1,000 years ago, people knew which direction the sun rose in each season. They knew the lunar phases without consulting an instrument. The body responded to the planet's cycles with a synchrony that modern life does not even recognize as a relevant variable. Today, the birth of children is scheduled for medical convenience. Most adults cannot point east without consulting an electronic device. The disconnection is not philosophical. It is electromagnetic, operating at the level of physiology. accumulating with each year spent further inside the artificial signal envelope. That this matters at the level of matter, and not only at the level of philosophy, has already been demonstrated empirically. In the 1930s, the American researcher Royal Rife identified that each pathogen possesses a specific resonance frequency at which its structure breaks down when exposed to it. Frequency applied with precision interacts with matter directly and measurably. Rife published his results. His work was recorded by the Smithsonian Institution in 1944, and the political fate of the research, its subsequent suppression, does not alter the principle it demonstrated. This principle, when applied to the larger system in which the human organism exists, produces a single conclusion. If the Earth is raising its operational frequency, as the Spiritist framework establishes for the transition from a world of trials to a world of regeneration, then the human organism needs to maintain the capacity to respond to that change. Each layer of artificial electromagnetic interference that interposes itself between the organism and the Earth's pulse reduces that capacity. The same person who lives immersed in continuous interference cannot respond to a planet whose frequency is rising, because the signal that should be guiding the response has been occluded. There is a second form of disconnection that operates not through electromagnetic interference, but through daily behavior, and that is as consequential for the vibrational question as the first. It is the systematic elimination of silence. The modern human being lives in a state of continuous stimulation. From the moment of waking to the moment of sleep, the senses are occupied. Notifications, music, voice, image, conversation, background audio. At no point in the day does a window exist in which the organism operates without external input, and a nervous system that never stops processing, never returns to the baseline range in which it can recalibrate to the planet's signal. The absence of silence prevents the body from returning to the frequency at which the synchronization with the Earth becomes operative. Every minute of uninterrupted stimulation is one more minute of distance between individual frequency and the field that should be guiding it. Sleep should function as the primary recalibration mechanism. During deep sleep, the brain enters slower frequency states that approach the resonance of the Earth ionosphere cavity, and the organism uses this period to re-anchor itself in the planetary signal. But the sleep quality of most people has been structurally compromised. Screens kept on until the last minutes before bed hold the brain in alert. Blue light suppresses melatonin. The body obeys the signal it is given. It sleeps but does not rest, and spends hours in a superficial state that does not deliver the recalibration the deep stages were designed for. This repeats every night, year after year. The vibrational consequence is cumulative. An organism that does not silence during the day and does not recalibrate at night progressively distances itself from the range where connection with the Earth's natural field remains operative. Noise has become the default. Silence has become the uncomfortable exception. Parallel to this physiological disconnection, an equally grave conceptual disconnection operates. Modern society has redefined success in exclusively material terms: salary, assets, title, visibility. A person considers themselves successful because they have accumulated quantities that can be displayed, measured, and compared. But when the same life is examined in the dimension of human relationships, what often appears is distant children, destroyed bonds, and a private life characterized by the absence of the intimacy that public success was supposed to make possible. The system rewards its participants for sustaining its own metric and has no interest in revising it. Within the Spiritist framework, this inversion is complete. The reason for incarnation is the internal growth of the spirit. Matter functions as the instrument through which that growth becomes possible. It was never the destination. At the moment of disincarnation, the only accumulation that crosses the threshold is the one that was built internally, the patience that was practiced, the forgiveness that was extended, the kindness sustained when no recognition was available, the silence held when speaking would have been easier. Everything else remains on this side. The credentials that were collected, the assets that were accumulated, the titles that were earned, all of it stays. None of it is transferable. The filter approaching the earth is the same principle made visible while the person is still incarnate. What does not cross at the moment of death does not cross at the moment of vibrational transition. The principle has been operative all along. It is becoming visible now. There is a persistent tendency to imagine the spiritual plane as a vague atmospheric region, a place of light perhaps, with no particular structure. This misconception reveals how much human understanding underestimates the organization and technological capacity of the dimensions that operate above the incarnate one. The work No Solar, dictated through the medium Chico Xavier by the spirit André Louis and published in 1944, documents an intermediate spiritual colony whose level of organization, communication, and infrastructure exceeds what human civilization had imagined at that time. And this colony is not the higher plane. It is situated in an intermediate range that still requires guarded walls, explicitly described, to prevent the entry of spirits whose vibrational pattern is incompatible with the range maintained inside. If an intermediate range already requires walls to maintain its vibrational integrity, the question that the spiritual plane poses to each returning spirit does not involve credentials. It does not involve degrees earned. It does not involve titles held. It involves a single dimension, what that spirit built internally during the period in which it had access to the incarnate experience. This internal construction is, in vibrational terms, everything that determines its next destination. No incarnate being is alone at any moment of their existence. The work Sex and Destiny, also dictated through Chico Xavier, documents a reality most people are unaware of. There is always a spiritual mentor observing, guiding within the permitted limits, waiting for the appropriate moment to influence. When there is no mentor, there is at least one spirit in an inferior condition attracted by vibrational affinity. Solitude in the absolute spiritual sense does not exist. What exists is ignorance about who is nearby. And the fundamental distinction lies in how these presences interact with the incarnate person. Superior spirits never invade. They respect free will, ask permission, wait for invitation, suggest, never impose. Inferior spirits operate differently, and at first glance, it appears they simply enter. But the appearance is misleading. The one who opens the door is the incarnate person themselves. Repeated low-frequency thoughts, destructive habits sustained over time, dense emotions cultivated as a way of life. Each of these creates the affinity that allows the approach. Without desire, without affinity, without the resonance that makes contact possible, the inferior presence cannot enter. The mechanism is the same as the one that governs the planetary filter: compatibility or incompatibility, resonance or its absence. Allan Kardec asks in question 192 of the Spirit's book what the most effective practical means of improving oneself in this life is. The answer is rarely what religious frameworks have led people to expect. Not declaration of faith, not study of doctrine, not adherence to ritual. The answer is the practice of good as a repeated, sustained daily act, performed without expectation of recognition. Everything else that humanity has constructed as a criterion of merit, education, erudition, status, social visibility, is irrelevant to this metric. The implication, when applied to the way societies distribute value among people, is radical. A school janitor who dedicates his routine to silently blessing every child who crosses the gate, every day, across decades, accumulates a vibrational construction that no university degree corresponds to. What separates the two is neither talent nor opportunity. It is the quality of what each one practices repeatedly in the environment available to them. The act of anonymous kindness, repeated over years without expectation of return, carries a vibrational potency that no public achievement matches. Following this direction is not a matter of grand gestures. The Spiritist doctrine is explicit. No one skips stages. No one reaches the summit on the first attempt. The principle is identical to any process of physical strengthening. Trying to lift 80 kilos on the first session in a gym produces injury, not progress. The correct weight is the one the body can handle now, and from there one builds, repetition after repetition, the capacity that did not exist before. In the spiritual journey, the mechanism is the same. Start with small acts of kindness and forgiveness. Sustain them over time. Gradually increase the internal demand. Crawling in the right direction already counts. Dragging oneself in the right direction already counts. What does not count is sitting still and rehearsing words. This brings the question of love into focus, and it is here that the most painful diagnostic of the filter applies. Love, in the vibrational framework, is not a word. It is energy. It needs to be understood intellectually and vibrated in the body. The person who has spent an entire existence repeating the word love without ever generating that frequency in any sustained way has built no vibrational construction in this dimension at all. The discrepancy between what is said and what is vibrated is precisely the type of discrepancy the filter renders visible. A person may have built an entire identity around the idea of being loving and still vibrate in the privacy of their internal life at a frequency that has nothing to do with what the word designates. The new earth of regeneration will have no space for this kind of performance. There is no malice in the exclusion. The receiver registers only what was actually vibrated. There is a final misconception worth dismantling because it is widely held and entirely useless. The misconception is that the solution might be geographic. That building shelters, planning escapes to other locations, or relocating to remote regions could allow a person to wait out the transition while preserving their current vibrational pattern. The question was never where you are. It was always what you vibrate. A spirit that carries dense frequency takes that frequency to any place in the universe it may relocate to. The location changes, the vibration remains, and it is the vibration exclusively that determines compatibility. The spiritual world is not separated from the physical world by a geographic barrier. It coexists within it, and the limitation belongs to the perception of the incarnate observer, not to the structure of reality. Most go through life without registering any of the dimensions operating around them, because the receiver is set to a range that does not include them. The transition of the earth to a world of regeneration has a recorded temporal milestone. In an interview on the Brazilian program Pinga Fogo, broadcast in 1969, the medium Chico Xavier transmitted the information from the spirit Emmanuel that around the year 2057, the Earth will complete the passage to the new category. From that point onward, the planet will cease to function as a world of trials and expiations. the vibrational range that has sustained the coexistence of spirits at vastly different levels of evolution will narrow. Those who are not vibrating within the new range will not have the energetic conditions to remain. The exclusion does not happen by decree. No tribunal sits to weigh the merits of each case. It happens by incompatibility, in the same way that an out-of-range signal simply ceases to be picked up by a receiver that no longer covers its frequency. The deadline does not require belief. It is not asking for assent. It is asking only for what every deadline asks, that the work be done or not done before the date arrives. And the question this deadline places before a person reading this now is not philosophical. It is vibrational. What was cultivated yesterday? What is being cultivated today? What will be cultivated tomorrow? One act of forgiveness practiced today changes the frequency. One act of anonymous kindness, sustained across weeks and months, changes the frequency. 1 minute of silence, in which the organism is allowed to reconnect with its native field, changes the frequency. None of these acts is dramatic. None of them produces an immediate visible result. But the accumulation of such acts, sustained across years, is the only construction that crosses the filter. Immobility also produces a result. Sustained selfishness consolidates the frequency. The refusal to forgive consolidates it. Love declared but never vibrated consolidates it. All of this builds just as much as practice builds, but in the opposite direction, toward the range that the new earth will not receive. There is no neutral state. The vibrational construction is happening in every life every day, regardless of whether the person is aware of it. The only question is in which direction. The filter approaching the earth does not respond to credentials, because credentials were never the metric. They were the metric of a system that organized incarnate life for a particular phase of the planet's evolution, a phase that is concluding. What replaces them is not a different external metric, but the only metric that has ever been operative beneath the visible one, and that is now becoming visible itself. What you practiced when you thought no one was watching, what you sustained internally when the audience was absent, what you built silently in the space that no document records, that is what the filter reads. That is what does not cross unless you have built it, and the time available to build it is finite and shortening and known.